Danny Carter had never seen anything so beautiful in his entire life. The Valkyrie Academy floated among the stars. Like a dream made real, its towers were made of crystal that caught the light of 3 distant suns and scattered rainbows across the empty blackness of space. Ships of every shape and size docked at its many platforms, carrying students from worlds Danny had only read about in books. He pressed his face against the window of the small human transport shuttle and tried to breathe normally. His heart was beating so fast he thought it might burst right out of his chest. Just 6 months ago he had been working in his father's garage back in Ohio, covered in grease and dreaming of something more. Now he was about to become the first human teenager to attend the most famous school in the entire galaxy. The Galactic Council had watched humanity for almost 100 years before deciding they were ready. Humans were young compared to other species. They had only discovered faster than light travel 30 years ago. Most aliens still thought of Earth as a primitive backwater planet filled with violent apes who had somehow stumbled into space. But the Council had rules. Every species got a chance to prove themselves, and so they had offered Earth 1 seat at the Valkyrie Academy, to be filled by lottery. Danny and LT Unk and GT Y's name had been pulled from millions of entries. His mother had cried for 3 days straight. His father had hugged him so tight, Danny thought his ribs might crack. You show them what humans can do, his father had said. You make us proud. Danny intended to do exactly the shuttle docked with a soft thump. Danny grabbed his single bag, which contained everything he owned, and walked toward the airlock. The door hissed open and he stepped into his new life. The first thing he noticed was the smell. The air was clean in a way that Earth air never was. It smelled like flowers he couldn't name and something sweet like honey mixed with rain. The second thing he noticed was the staring. Dozens of alien students stood in the arrival hall, watching him with expressions that ranged from curiosity to disgust. Danny had studied the major species before coming here. He recognized the tall insect-like six with their clicking mandibles. He saw the short reptilian thalls with their warm eyes and scaled skin. There were fin with their forearms and blue fur, and vocent traders with their gray skin and calculating stares. But mostly there were the Velry, were the oldest and most powerful species in the Council. They had ruled the galaxy for 3,000 years, and they made sure everyone remembered it. They were tall and thin with silver skin that seemed to glow from within. Their eyes were like liquid mercury, beautiful and cold at the same time. They moved with a grace that made Danny feel clumsy just watching them. A Volfury administrator approached him. She looked down at him with an expression of polite boredom. You are the human, she said. It wasn't a question. Yes, ma'am. Danny Carter. She made a note on a glowing tablet. Your quarters are in the East Wing. Classes begin tomorrow. Try not to break anything. She walked away. Before Danny could respond, he made his way through the grand atrium, following the signs toward the East Wing. The ceiling arched high above him, decorated with murals showing Belai history, great battles, scientific discoveries, the founding of the Council, all of it centered on the silver-skinned aliens and their achievements. Danny didn't see any other species represented in the art. He was halfway across the atrium when she appeared, Princess Lysara Val. Darren stepped out from a group of Valerie students like a star emerging. From clouds, she was younger than Danny. Had expected, maybe 17 or 18 in human years. Her silver hair fell past her shoulders like water, and her mercury eyes held a sharp intelligence that made Danny and LT Unk and GT Y's stomach tightened with warning. So this is humanity's offering, she said, thought her voice was musical, like bells chiming in a gentle wind, but her words were poison. Wrapped in silk, the other students stopped what they were doing. Conversations died, every eye in the atrium turned toward Danny and the princess, a child who smells of engine grease and desperation. Lara continued, walking slowly around Danny like a predator circling prey. Tell me, little human, can you even read, or does your species still communicate through grunts and scratching pictures in dirt? Laughter rippled through the watching crowd. Danny felt heat rising to his cheeks. His hands curled into fists at his sides. Back home he would have said something, he would have defended himself, thrown back an insult, stood his ground. Danny Carter was no coward. He had faced down bullies twice his size. In the schoolyard, he had never backed down from a fight in his life, but he wasn't back home. His father's voice echoed in his mind, a memory from years ago. They had been watching a nature documentary about wolves. A young wolf had challenged the pack leader, snarling and snapping. See that? His father had said that young one is all noise, wants everyone to know he's tough, but watch the old wolf. He doesn't bark, he doesn't growl, he just waits, because the strong don't need to prove anything. Danny looked at Princess Lysara. He saw the gleam in her eyes, the slight curve of her perfect lips. She wanted a reaction. She wanted him to shout, to defend humanity, to make a fool of himself in front of the entire academy. He wouldn't give her that satisfaction. Danny took a slow breath. He uncurled his fists. He met her mercury eyes with his plain brown ones, and he held her gaze for 3 long seconds. Then he turned and walked away. Silence that followed was deafening. Danny could feel it pressing against his back as he crossed the atrium. He didn't run, he didn't hurry, he just walked, steady and calm, until he reached the corridor leading to the east wing. Behind him, Princess Lara stood frozen. In 3,000 years of history, no one had ever turned their back on royalty. It was the gravest insult imaginable. Wars had been started over less, but Danny wasn't trying to insult her. He wasn't trying to make a statement or prove a point. He was trying to survive, and something deep in his gut told him that the only way to beat someone like Lara was to refuse to play her game. He found his quarters, a small room barely bigger than a closet, and sat down on the narrow bed. His hands were shaking, his heart was pounding, but he had made it through the first day. Tomorrow would be harder. Danny knew that the princess would not forget what had happened today. She would come for him again and again, trying to break him, trying to force a reaction. He would give her nothing but silence, and somehow, someway, he would prove that humanity belonged among the stars. Word traveled fast at the Vel Academy. By the next morning, every student on the station knew what the human had done. Danny Carter, the primitive ape from Earth, had turned his back on Princess Lysara Valthurin. He had walked away from the third in line to the Valerie throne as if she were nothing more than a stranger on the street. Some students thought he was incredibly brave, others thought he was incredibly Stupid, most thought both. Danny tried to ignore the whispers as he walked to his first class. He kept his eyes forward and his face calm, even though his insides felt like a knot of snakes. The classroom was a large circular room with floating desks that adjusted it to each species. When Danny sat down, his desk lowered until his feet could touch the floor. The teacher was a V30 male with the same silver skin and mercury eyes as the princess. He looked at Danny the way someone might look at a bug that had crawled onto their dinner plate. Today, we discuss the fundamentals of galactic law, the teacher began. I trust our human guest can follow along despite his species' limited experience with civilization. A few students laughed. Danny said nothing. He opened his tablet and began taking notes. The class continued like that for an hour. The teacher made small comments about human ignorance. Students glanced at Danny with smirks on their faces. Danny kept his head down and learned everything he could. After class, Princess Leia was waiting for him in the hallway. She fell into step beside him, her silver robes flowing like water around her tall frame. Other students cleared a path, not wanting to get in the way. I hear you survived your first class, she said. I'm almost impressed. I expected you to run crying back to your shuttle by now. Danny kept walking, nothing to say. How disappointing. I thought humans were supposed to be chatty little creatures, always making noise, always demanding attention. Danny turned a corner toward the dining hall. Lysera grabbed his arm and spun him around to face her. Her grip was stronger than he expected, her fingers like cold iron through his sleeve. When I speak to you, human, you will answer, she hissed. Do you understand? I am royalty. Your entire species should bow before mine. Danny looked at her hand on his arm, then he looked at her face. He waited. After a long moment, Visera released him. There was something new in her eyes now. Confusion maybe, or frustration. She wasn't used to being ignored. Danny turned and continued walking. This became their pattern. Over the following weeks, the Sarah would find him, insult him, try to provoke him. She mocked his clothing, his accent, the way he walked. She called humans parasites, barely evolved primates who had stumbled into technology they didn't deserve. She predicted that Earth would destroy itself within a century through war or pollution or simple stupidity. Danny never responded, not once. He went to his classes, studied harder than anyone else, and spent his free time in the engineering bay. The academy had a workshop filled with broken equipment that no one bothered to repair. Valkyrie didn't believe in manual labor. They had machines and servants for everything. When something broke, they simply replaced it. But Danny had grown up fixing things. His father had taught him that every machine, no matter how damaged, could be saved with enough patience and skill. So Danny spent his evenings taking apart old devices and putting them back together. The work calmed his mind and gave his hands something to do. One night, Athian student named Vox wandered into the engineering bay. Vox was short and covered in dark green scales with large eyes that always seemed kind. He was one of the few students who hadn't laughed at Danny during the first day. What are you doing? Vox asked, watching Danny work on a broken climate regulator. Fixing this, Danny said. The heating coil is shot, but I think I can rewire it. Vox moved closer, his tail swishing behind him with curiosity. You know how. To repair machines with your hands, how else would I do it? We have drones for that, automated systems. Nobody does this kind of work anymore. Danny shrugged. Drones break, automated systems fail, but if you know how something works, you can fix it yourself. You don't need to wait for help that might never come. Vox thought about this for a moment, then he sat down on a nearby crate and watched Danny work. They became friends after that. Vox started visiting the engineering bay every evening, asking questions about human technology and culture. Danny was happy to answer. It felt good to talk to someone who actually wanted to listen. Why don't you fight back? Vox asked one night. The princess humiliates you every day. She says terrible things. Don't you want to defend yourself? Danny sat down his tools and looked at his friend. Back home, my dad always said that silence is the loudest answer. Some people want a reaction. They feed on anger and conflict. If you don't give them what they want, they have to face their own noise. What does that mean? It means the princess is trying to get me to explode. She wants me to yell, to fight, to prove that humans are the violent savages she thinks we are. But every time I stay quiet, she has to ask herself why. Every time I walk away, she has to wonder if maybe she's the one with the problem. Vox scratched his scaled chin. That seems like a very patient strategy. Humans are good at waiting. Danny smiled. We had to be. We're not the fastest or the strongest species, but we survived ice ages and famines and wars that should have wiped us out. We did it by being stubborn, by adapting, by refusing to give up. Your species is strange, Vox said. Yeah, Danny agreed. We are. As the weeks passed, Dai's reputation began to change. Word spread about the human who could fix anything. A Crick student brought him a malfunctioning translator chip, and Danny repaired it in 10 minutes. A group of Finari asked him to look at their shuttle's navigation system, and he had it running perfectly within an hour. He never asked for payment or credit. He just helped whoever needed it and went back to his studies. Thought other students started talking to him. Not many and not often, but enough. They asked questions about Earth, about human history, about the strange species that had climbed out of the trees and reached for the stars. Danny answered honestly, never bragging, never exaggerating, and through it all, he never once responded to Princess Lassar's insults. She was watching him now. He could tell her mockery had become less frequent, though no less cruel when it came. But there was something else in her eyes when she looked at him. Not hatred exactly, more like a puzzle she couldn't solve. Danny hoped that was a good sign. He hoped he could survive long enough to find out. 6 months had passed since Danny Carter arrived at the Vell Academy. He had settled into a routine, classes in the morning, study sessions in the afternoon, and long hours in the engineering bay at night. He had made a few friends beyond Vox, students from species who valued hard work and quiet competence. The mockery from other students had faded to occasional whispers. Even Princess Lazara had reduced her attacks to cold glances and the occasion and cutting remark. Danny, who's starting to feel like he might actually belong here. Then the alarm started. Screaming died. Happened during the night cycle when most students were asleep. Danny was in the engineering bay, as usual, working on a salvaged communications array. The first warning siren nearly made him drop his tools. Red lights flashed across every surface. and a calm automated voice began, speaking in 17 different languages. Warning: asteroid impact detected. Power grid compromised. All students report to emergency stations. Danny ran out of the engineering bay and into chaos. Students were pouring out of their quarters, their faces filled with confusion and fear. The Velry administrators were trying to direct traffic, but they looked just as scared as everyone else. The lights flickered overhead, then dimmed to emergency power. Temperature was already starting to drop. Danny grabbed a passing Thalian, a young female with panic in her eyes. What happened? What hit us? Rogue asteroid storm, she gasped, came out of nowhere. The orbital power station took a direct hit. We're running on backup generators, but they won't last long. She pulled away and disappeared into the crowd. Danny stood still for a moment, letting the chaos flow around him. His mind was racing, sorting through everything he knew about the Academy systems. The power station was separate from the Academy itself, connected by energy transmission beams. If the station was damaged, the Academy had maybe 12 hours of reserve power before life support failed completely. 12 hours until everyone on the Thai station froze to death. He pushed through the crowd toward the main administrative center. Valkyrie officials were gathered around holographic displays, arguing in their musical language. Their silver faces were tight with worry. Princess Lysara was there too, standing apart from the others. For the first time since Danny had met her, she looked uncertain. Her perfect composure had cracked, revealing the frightened teenager underneath. What's the status? Danny asked one of the officials. The Vuliri looked at him with surprise, then disgust. This does not concern you, human. Return to your quarters and wait for instructions. How long until the power station is repaired? The station is destroyed. We've sent distress calls to the nearest Valkyrie fleet, but they are 3 days away at maximum speed. Danny's stomach dropped. 3 days? We don't have 3 days. We have maybe 12 hours of reserve power. We are aware of the situation. The official snapped. Now leave. This is a matter for civilized species to handle. Danny didn't move. He looked at the holographic displays, at the diagrams of the Academy's power systems. His mind was already working, seeing possibilities that the Vulfrey couldn't. You have a secondary fusion reactor in the lower levels, he said. It's supposed to be for emergencies only, but it's been offline for years. Why? The official stared at him. How do you know about that? I've been exploring the station. The reactor is intact, but the control systems are corrupted. You'd need to bypass the automated systems and run it manually. Impossible. The Valkyrie do not operate machines manually. That is what automation is. For your automation is what's killing you. Danny said, you build systems so advanced that you forgot how to do anything without them. Now those systems are down and you're helpless. Official silver face flushed with anger. How dare you speak to me this way? Primitive, your species barely understands fire. My species survived ice ages by starting fires with sticks. Danny shot back. We walked across continents, built cities with our bare hands, and reached the stars while your ancestors were still deciding which shade of silver looked best on their robes. Don't tell me about primitive. The room went silent. Every Valkyrie was staring at Danny now, including Lysara. He had finally broken his silence, and the words had come out sharper than he intended, but he didn't have time to care about diplomacy. People were going to die if he didn't act. I can fix the reactor, Danny said. I've been studying your systems for months. I know how they work, probably better than most of your engineers. Give me access to the lower levels and a team of anyone willing to help. I'll get your power back online. The official laughed. You a human child. You expect us to trust our lives to you. Do you have a better option? No one answered. Danny turned and walked out of the administrative center. He didn't wait for permission. He knew where the lower levels were, and he knew he didn't have time to argue with people who would rather die than accept help from a human. He was halfway to the maintenance lifts when he heard footsteps behind him. Vox appeared at his side, his scaled face determined. I'm coming with you, Vox said. It might be dangerous. I know. I'm still coming. More footsteps joined them. A Griggs named Chitter, whose translator Danny had fixed months ago. 3 Finari who remembered when Danny had repaired their shuttle. A handful of other students from species who had learned to respect the quiet human who worked with his hands. No, Veli joined them not at first. Then Danny heard the click of expensive shoes on the metal floor. He turned to see Princess Lazara walking toward them, her silver robes exchanged for a practical jumpsuit. I'm coming too, she said. Danny raised an eyebrow. Why? Because my people are scared and useless, and you seem to be the only one with a plan. I refuse to freeze to death while waiting for rescue like some helpless child. For a long moment Danny just looked at her. This was the girl who had mocked him every day for 6 months. The princess who had called his species primitive and worthless, but right now she was just another person who didn't want to die. Fine, Danny said, but you do what I say. When I say it, down there I'm in charge. Understood. Lazar's jaw tightened. Being ordered around by human clearly burned her pride, but she nodded. Understood. Danny turned back toward the maintenance lifts. Then let's go save the station. They descended into the lower levels together, a group of students from across the galaxy, led by a teenage mechanic from Ohio. The cold was already seeping through the walls. They had maybe 10 hours now, probably less, but Danny Carter had never backed down from a challenge in his life, and he wasn't about to start now. 2 years had passed since the day Danny Carter saved the very academy. 2 years of classes and friendships and late nights in the engineering bay. 2 years of conversations with Princess Lara that had slowly transformed from awkward politeness into genuine friendship. Now, graduation day had arrived, and Danny stood in the great hall wearing formal robes that still felt strange on his body. The hall was packed with students, teachers, and dignitaries from across the galaxy. Holographic cameras floated near the ceiling, broadcasting the ceremony to billions of viewers on thousands of worlds. This was the most prestigious graduation in galactic history, and everyone wanted to see what would happen because rumors had been spreading for weeks. Danny looked out at the crowd and spotted his parents. The front row, his mother was crying as she always did at important moments. His father sat straight and proud, his mechanic's hands folded in his lap. They had traveled 3 weeks through space to be here, and seeing them made Danny and LT, Unc and GT wise heart feel full in a way he couldn't Describe, he also spotted Vox in the crowd along with Chitter and the Finari, who had helped during the crisis. They were graduating too, along with hundreds of other students from dozens of species, but everyone knew that today was really about one thing, the announcement principle. Then Lazar's father, in one of the most powerful Valkyrie in the galaxy, stepped onto the speaking platform. He was tall even for his species, with silver hair that fell past his shoulders and eyes that had seen centuries of galactic history. We gather today to honor our graduates, he said, his voice carrying through the hall without amplification. They have studied, grown, and proven themselves worthy of the education this academy provides. But before we present diplomas, my daughter has requested the opportunity to address the assembly. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. This was unusual. Royalty did not typically speak at academic ceremonies. Lysara rose from her seat and walked to the platform. She was beautiful in her formal robes, every inch the princess she had been raised to be. But Dany saw the nervousness in her eyes, the slight trembling in her hands, that only someone who knew her well would notice. She looked at him just for a moment, and he gave her a small nod. Doc, she turned to face the crowd. 2 years ago, I stood in this academy's atrium and mocked a human boy for being primitive, she began. Her voice was steady, though Dany knew what it cost her to say these words. I told him that his species was a mistake, that they would destroy themselves within a century, that they had nothing to offer the galaxy. The hall was utterly silent. I was wrong. Lysara let those words hang in the air before continuing. I have spent the past 2 years learning about humanity, not from books or databases, but from humans themselves. I have learned about their history, their struggles, their extraordinary ability to survive and adapt. I have learned that they are not primitive, they are resilient, they are not weak, they are patient, and they are not a mistake. They are exactly what this galaxy needs. She turned to look at Dany directly. Dany Carter came to this academy alone, the only human in a school filled with species who looked down on him. He faced mockery and contempt every day, and he responded with silence and grace. When our station faced destruction, it was not Volfuri technology that saved us. It was human hands and human knowledge and human courage. Lysara raised her voice so that every being in the hall could hear her. Clearly, I hereby announce that the Velry Empire will sponsor humanity's full membership in the Galactic Council, not as a junior species, not as probationary members, as equals. This is long overdue, and I am ashamed it took a crisis for my people to see what should have been obvious. From the start, the hall erupted. Some cheered, some gasped, some sat in stunned silence. Dany and LT Unk and GT Y's mother was sobbing now, and even his father was wiping his eyes. Lysara wasn't finished. I have also learned that advancement is not measured by the elegance of your technology or the age of your civilization. It is measured by the strength of your character in the face of adversity, and in that measure, humanity has nothing to prove to anyone. They have already proven themselves 1,000 times over. In ice ages survived and wars ended. Diseases conquered and stars reached. They did not crawl out of the mud and reach space by accident. They did it through determination, creativity, and an absolute refusal to give up. She stepped back from the platform. I call for an immediate vote from all council. Representatives present. The vote was unanimous. Humanity was accepted into the Galactic Council as full and equal members, just like that. Centuries of prejudice swept away in a single moment. The ceremony continued after that, but Danny barely registered it. He received his diploma in a daze, shook hands with officials whose names he would never remember, and smiled for cameras until his face hurt. It all felt unreal, like a dream he might wake from at any moment. Finally, when the crowds had thinned and the cameras had floated away, Danny found himself standing alone on the observation deck, the same spot where he and Lara had talked 2 years ago. The stars looked exactly the same as they always had, but everything else had changed. Footsteps approached behind him. "You changed everything," Mox said, coming to stand beside his friend, "and you did it without raising your voice." Once, Danny smiled. Sometimes the best way to prove someone wrong is to let them figure it out themselves. Humans have been underestimated since the first fish crawled onto land and decided to try something new. Being mocked doesn't bother us. We just keep building, keep adapting, keep surprising everyone. And if they keep underestimating you, Danny thought about his father's garage, about the tools that had been passed down through 3 generations of Carters. He thought about all the times humans had faced impossible odds and survived. Anyway, then we keep proving them wrong. That's the human way. More footsteps announced Lysara's arrival. She had changed out of her formal robes into the simple clothes she preferred now, ones that let her move and work instead of just looking decorative. "The council wants to meet with you," she said. "They have questions about human engineering principles. Apparently half the species in the galaxy want to learn your primitive methods." Danny laughed. It was a genuine laugh, free from the tension that had defined his first year at the academy. "Tell them I'll be there in a minute." Lazar nodded and started to leave, then stopped. She turned back, and there was something soft in her mercury eyes. "Thank you, Danny, for not giving up on me, for seeing past my cruelty to the scared girl underneath. Thank you for being brave enough to change," Danny replied. "That took more courage than anything I did." She smiled and walked away. Danny took one last look at the stars. Somewhere out there, billions of humans were waking up to the news that their species had been accepted as equals in the galactic community. Children would grow up dreaming of alien worlds they could actually visit. Scientists would collaborate with species that had knowledge spanning millennia. The future had cracked open like an egg, revealing possibilities that had seemed impossible just hours ago, all because a teenage boy from Ohio had walked into a room full of galactic royalty, faced mockery and contempt, and chosen silence. His silence had spoken louder than any words ever could. It had echoed across the stars. Danny smiled one last time, then turned to go meet with the Galactic Council. He had work to do, knowledge to share, bridges to build between his people and the rest of the galaxy. But first he was going to call his parents. His dad had always said that the strong don't need to prove anything. Danny hadn't understood that lesson as a child, but he understood it now. Real strength wasn't about winning arguments or defeating enemies. It was about staying true to yourself when everyone expected you to break. He had stayed true. And in the end that had made all the difference. The lower levels of the Velry Academy were dark and cold. Emergency lights cast everything in a dim red glow, and frost was already forming on the metal walls. Danny led his small team through narrow corridors that hadn't been used in decades, following a mental map he had built during his months of exploration. The secondary fusion reactor was located in the deepest part of the station, behind 3 sealed doors that required manual override. Dai's hands were shaking from the cold as he worked on the first lock using tools he had grabbed from the engineering bay. How do you know this will work? Lara asked. She was standing behind him, her breath forming clouds in the freezing air. I don't, Danny admitted, but the reactor itself should be fine. These things are built to last centuries. The problem is the control software. It crashed years ago and nobody bothered to fix it because you had the orbital power station. So we need to bypass the software. We need to run the reactor manually, the old way. Danny got the first door open and moved to the second. Humans did it for years before we had computers smart enough to handle it. It's dangerous and slow, but it works. They pushed through the second door and entered a large chamber filled with dormant machinery. The reactor sat in the center, a massive cylinder covered in pipes and cables and blinking lights that had gone dark. Danny walked around it slowly, studying every connection and junction. Vox, I need you to find the main fuel line and check for blockages. Chitter, you're on the cooling system. Make sure nothing is frozen solid. He turned to the Finari. You 3 check the power distribution grid. I need to know which circuits are still working. Everyone moved to their tasks without question. Even Lysara stepped forward. What do you need me to do? She asked. Danny hesitated. Part of him wanted to tell her to stay out of the way, but there was something genuine in her eyes now, something that hadn't been there before. Can you read technical diagrams? Of course, every child learns basic engineering. Then I need you to monitor the reactor's output levels once we get it started. If the numbers go into the red zone, you tell me immediately. Can you do that? Lazara nodded. She moved to a dusty control panel and began wiping away years of neglect. They worked through the night. Dai's hands bled from sharp edges and frozen metal. His fingers went numb, then painful, then numb again. He kept working. He didn't have a choice. The reactor was old but well built. The Valkyrie had created it as a backup system over 2 centuries ago, back when they still remembered how to do things without automation. Danny found the manual controls buried under layers of upgrades that had never been used. He stripped away the unnecessary additions and exposed the simple heart of the machine. Fuel line is clear, Vox reported. Cooling system is operational. Jitter clicked. Power distribution grid has damage in sections 7 through 12. One of the FAR said, but the main conduits are intact. Danny nodded. That's enough. Everyone stand back. He placed his hands on the manual ignition controls. This was the dangerous part. Without computer oversight, the reactor could overload if the startup sequence wasn't perfect. One mistake could vaporize everyone in the room. Danny closed his eyes and thought about his father's garage back in Ohio. He remembered the smell of engine oil, the sound of tools clinking against metal, the patient way his dad had taught him to listen to machines. Every engine has a heartbeat, his father used to say. Learn to hear it and you can fix Anything. Danny opened his eyes and began the startup sequence. The reactor coughed, sputtered, and roared to life. Heat blasted outward, melting the frost. On the walls, lights flickered and steadied. The hum of power flowed through the station like blood through veins. It's working, Lara breathed. Her eyes were fixed on the control panel. Output is stable. We have power. Danny sagged against the reactor housing, exhaustion hitting him all at once. They had done it. They had actually done it. Over the next few hours, Danny and his team worked to distribute the reactor's power throughout the station. It wasn't elegant. They had to bypass damaged sections and reroute energy through pathways that were never designed for it. The result was a patchwork system, held together by willpower and desperation. But it worked out. By the time the Vel rescue fleet arrived 3 days later, they found the academy warm, lit, and functioning. Every student and staff member had survived, and when they asked who was responsible, every finger pointed to the same person. The human. In the weeks that followed, Danny became famous. News of his actions spread across the station and then across the galaxy. The primitive human who had saved Velry Academy using nothing but basic tools and ancient knowledge. Some people were inspired. Others were uncomfortable. Many simply didn't believe it. Danny tried to ignore all of it. He went back to his routine, attending classes and working in the engineering bay. But things were different now. Students who had ignored him before nodded as he passed. Teachers who had mocked him treated him with careful respect, and Princess Lara kept her distance. Danny noticed her watching him sometimes from across the dining hall during class, but she never approached him. She never spoke to him. The girl who had tormented him for 6 months had gone completely silent. One evening, Danny was sitting alone on the observation deck watching the stars. It was his favorite spot on the station, a quiet place where he could think without interruption. The view was incredible. Millions of points of light scattered across the infinite darkness. He heard footsteps behind him, but didn't turn around. I came to apologize, Lara said quietly. Danny waited. She moved to stand beside him, looking out at the same stars. Her silver face was pale and her hands were clasped tightly in front of her. I have spent my entire life being told that the Valkyrie are superior, she continued, that we evolved beyond the struggles that plague lesser species. I believed that made us better. I believed it meant we had nothing to learn from anyone else. She paused and Danny could see her struggling with the words. But when the crisis came, we were helpless. Our advanced technology failed us. Our administrators panicked. I panicked, and you, the human I had mocked for being primitive, you were the one who saved us. You helped. Danny said, everyone helped because you led us, because you knew what to do when nobody else did. Lysara finally turned to face him. I have been thinking about your silence all those months when I insulted you and you never responded. At first I thought it was weakness, then I thought it was a strategy. Now I understand it was neither. What was it? Then patience, she said. You were waiting for us to see ourselves clearly. No argument could have shown me my arrogance. Only my own failure could do that. Danny was quiet for a moment. He thought about all the times he had wanted to shout at her, to defend himself, to prove that humans weren't what she thought they were. He had swallowed every word. My grandmother used to say that the loudest person in The room is usually the most afraid, he finally said. I figured if I stayed quiet long enough, the fear behind your words would show itself. Lazar nodded. Slowly. I was afraid, I still am. Everything I believed about my people, about my place in the galaxy, has been shaken. I don't know what to think anymore. That's okay, Danny said. Not knowing is how learning starts. They stood together in silence for a while. Two teenagers from different worlds, watching the stars. Humans are not what I expected, Lara finally said. Danny smiled. We're not what anyone expects. That's kind of our thing. For the first time since Danny had met her, Lara smiled back, a real smile without superiority or pretense. It transformed her face, made her look younger and more vulnerable. Perhaps I could learn more about your species, she said, if you would be willing to teach me. Danny considered her for a long moment. This was the girl who had made his first months at the academy miserable. She had hurt him in ways that still stung when he thought about them, but she was also the girl who had climbed into the freezing lower levels to help save the station. She was someone willing to admit she was wrong and ask for a second chance. That took courage, real courage. I'd like that, Danny said, and somewhere in the stars above them, the future began to shift.